This is part 2 of the homework video guide for section 5.5, and I will start off with question 12a. And for 12a, I need to complete the table, graph the function, and also find the domain and the range for the function here. Okay, so for 12a, we're given that g of x equals to negative 2x minus 1, and we're given the following x values, 0, 1, negative 1, and negative 2. Okay, so let's go ahead and start calculating the corresponding y values. So let me just rewrite the function here as negative 2x minus 1. Okay, let's go ahead and evaluate g of 0 first. So g of 0 just means anytime you see the x variable, that gets replaced with 0. And let's go ahead and calculate this now. So negative 2 times 0 is going to be 0. So 0 minus 1 is going to be negative 1. So this negative 1 will go right here. And basically, you just kind of repeat this pattern until, you just kind of repeat the calculations until you're finished here. So the next one is g of 1. So g of 1. So anytime you see an x variable, that x variable gets replaced with 1. And then you're just doing calculations here now. So negative 2 times 1 is going to be negative 2. And then subtract the 1, and that gives you negative 3. So negative 3 would go into that box. Okay. All right, so we're done with g of 1, and now let's continue on with g of negative 1. So g of negative 1, and once again, anytime you see the x variable, that gets replaced with negative 1 this time. And then you're just calculating here. So negative 2 times negative 1 is going to be positive 2, and positive 2 minus 1 is going to be positive 1. So 1 goes there. Let's erase this. And then finally, let's finish off this problem by figuring out what g of negative 2 is. So negative 2 times negative 2 minus 1. And negative 2 times negative 2 is going to be positive 4. And positive 4 minus 1 is going to be 3. So 3 would go into that box right there. All right, so there is our table of values all finished there. So just remember, this g of x symbol right there, function notation, that's pretty much the same thing as finding the y value, right? All right, so let's go ahead and now finish off the domain. The domain is just your x value, so your domain is 0, 1, negative 1, and negative 2. So let's go ahead and write that in. So let's go from least to greatest. So negative 2 is the smallest, so it'll be negative 2, then negative 1, then 1, then 0. And then in order to find your range is basically your y values here. And for your y values, let's go from least to greatest. So a negative 3 is the smallest, so negative 3. And then we have negative 1. And then I have positive 1. And then 3 is the biggest y value. So there's my range right there. All right, and then after that, all you're doing now is you're just kind of plotting the points here. So if I have 0 and negative 1, let's go ahead and plot that on the graph there. So 0 and negative 1 is going to be roughly right there. So that's 0 comma negative 1. Then after that, let's plot 1 comma negative 3. So 1 comma negative 3 is about there. So 1 comma negative 3 is at that point right there. And then let's go ahead and graph negative 1, positive 1, which is about there, right? So negative 1, positive 1 is right there. Okay. And then finally, let's just plot the last one here, which is negative 2 comma 3. So I go left 2, then up 3. And there it is. There's that point right there. And there is your graph for that particular problem. Okay, let's move on to question number 12D now. So same problem, but we're given a different function here. So g of x is now x divided by 2 minus 1. And for this problem, we're given like the g of x values first. So this is the same thing as your y values. So what we could do first is maybe we can go ahead and fill in the range right now, because the range is essentially your y values, right? So if you look at those green numbers, negative 2 is the smallest, so we'll write down negative 2 first for my first value for the range, and then negative 1, and then 0, and then positive 1 is the largest there. So there are my y values, or my range values right there, negative 2, 1, 0, and 1. Okay, so that's not too bad. After that, let me just kind of start off by rewriting the original problem here. G of x equals to x over 2 minus 1. And now we're given that we're given the g of x values like negative 1, 0, negative 1, and negative 2. So what you're doing now is g of x is 1. So what happens here is this g of x is going to be replaced with that 1. So 1 would be on the left-hand side. but on the right hand side, everything remains the same. And now our goal is to solve for x. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and do that. So I take my -1, bring it over. So that's going to be 1 plus 1 equals to x over 2. And then 1 plus 1 is going to be 2, and I still have my x over 2 over here. And then in order to get rid of this bottom 2 here, I just multiply, right? Because right now it's dividing, so the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So 2 times 2 is going to be 4. So x would equal to 4 here. So 4 would go right up there. Okay, and that's how you kind of do the algebra for this particular problem here. I'm running out a little bit of space here, so I'm just going to rewrite g of x over here. So maybe I'll write over here. So g of x equals to x over 2 minus 1. Let me erase this. Okay, so our next g of x value is going to be 0. So 0 goes in for g of x. So 0 equals to x over 2 minus 1. And right away, this minus 1 goes over. So that's going to become positive 1, right? So 0 plus 1 is going to be 1. And that's going to equal to x over 2. And then this 2 will multiply with that 1. So 2 times 1 is going to be 2. So this 2 would go right there. Right, and then let's go ahead and continue the pattern here. Okay, so my next g of x value is going to be -1. So -1 would go right there. And then this -1, if I bring that over, is going to be -1 plus 1, right? So it's really -1 and then plus 1. And -1 plus 1 is going to be 0. So now I have 0 here, and this is going to be x over 2. And if I multiply 2 by 0, 0 times 2 is going to be 0, and that's going to be equal to my next x value. So there we go. There goes my 0 there. And then from here, you can probably see the pattern here, right? You're pretty much going down by 2 each time, right? So this value is going to be -2. All right, and so that's how you do the math on question 12D there. And let's go ahead and find my domain here from least to greatest. So -2 is my smallest number. So my first x value would be -2, then it would be 0, then +2, then this 4 is the highest x value. So that's going to be my last number on my domain. Okay, after that, the last thing you have to do now is just kind of plot the points. So my first point right here is, this point is really 4, 1, right? So my x value is 4 and my y value is 1. So go over 4, up 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and up 1 right there. All right, so this point right here is that point right there. Okay, and then after that, let's do 2, 0, which is going to be right there. So 2, 0 is right there. And after that, we just continue plotting points here. So 0, -1 is going to be about there. And then finally, the last point here, -2, -2 is going to be that point right there. And let me just erase this part right there. And there's my graph for that particular problem. Okay, great. Let's move on to question number 13 now. So 13, a little bit of algebra to do for question number 13. So we have a few problems to try out for here. So our goal is I need to find the equation f of x equals to mx plus b. Very similar to like y equals to mx plus b. So I need to find the equation of a line in slope-intercept form. And what you need to do here is you have to understand that when you're given this notation right here, f of 0 equals to -3, this is really testing to see if you understand what this notation gives you. So the x value is 0 and the y value is -3. So if you change that to a coordinate, that's the same thing as 0, -3. All right, and for the function notation below, the x value here is -2 and the y value is 5. So if you translate that into a coordinate, it would be -2, 5. All right, so basically the question is now saying if you're given those 2 points, 0, -3 and -2, 5, can you write the equation in slope-intercept form? Well, step number 1, you need to find the slope, right? So you might remember that the slope is given by this expression right here. It's your second y value minus your first y value divided by your second x value minus your first x value. All right, so it doesn't really matter what you pick as your second y value. Let me just pick -3. So here's my -3, and then minus, and then what is my first y value? Well, in this case, it's going to be 5, right? So -3 minus 5. And then divided by your second x value, which is now going to be 0. So let's go ahead and write down 0. And then minus your first x value, and your first x value is going to be -2, right? So -2. All right, so now you do the math here. So negative 3 minus 5 is going to be negative 8 divided by, and this is going to be essentially 0 plus 2, and 0 plus 2 is going to be positive 2, and this will give you negative 4. So my slope is negative 4. Okay, great. So if I go back to the original problem here, the goal was to write your equation in the form y equals mx plus b. And your m value we just found out, that was negative 4, so negative 4x. And what is your y-intercept? Well, this right here is your y-intercept, right? So whenever x is 0, then your y value will be negative 3. So that, by definition, the y-intercept happens when the x value equals to 0. So your y value here is going to be a negative 3, which is the same thing as the y-intercept. So f of x equals to negative 4x minus 3. Okay, so let's move on to the next one here. This is 13b, and 13b is a little bit harder because we're going to have a harder slope to work with here. So I have 2 and 4. So if I translate that into a coordinate, this would be 2, 4. And if I look at this f of negative 1 and negative 4, if I translate that into a coordinate, that's going to be negative 1 and negative 4. So that's step number 1. You take your function notation and you translate it into coordinates, and then after that you find the slope. So your slope is going to be your second y value, which is going to be 4 in this case, minus the first y value, which is negative 4, all divided by your second x value, in this case it's going to be 2, minus your first x value, and that's going to be negative 1. Okay, and then from there, basically you just need to kind of calculate the numerator and the denominator here. So this is 4 minus negative 4. That's the same thing as 4 plus 4, and 4 plus 4 is going to be 8. And then on the denominator here, I have 2 minus negative 1, which is the same thing as 2 plus 1, and 2 plus 1 is going to be 3. So my slope here is going to be 8/3. Okay, so let's go ahead and write that down. My slope is equal to 8/3. Okay, let me just kind of erase all this here. Now, one of the reasons why this question is a little bit harder than 13a is because we don't have the y-intercept, right? So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and find the y-intercept. There's several ways you can do it. I can do this, for example, y equals to mx plus b. And I can use this first coordinate here, which is 2, 4. So my y value here is 4. My m value, we calculated that to be 8/3, so 8/3, and then x. And remember, what is the x value here? Well, the x value here is just 2, right? So I can change that x to be a positive 2, and then my plus b. Okay, and once again, one of the reasons why this question is a little bit harder is because the calculations are a bit tougher here. So 8 times 2 is going to be 16, so 16/3 plus b. And then in order to find the y-intercept, which is b, we need to solve for this equation here. So I take my 16/3 and I bring it over, and that's going to be minus 16/3, and that equals to b. And now we have to do a grade 8 level fraction problem here, where we do 4 minus 16/3. And we can definitely put this over 1, and we can times the top and bottom here by 3. So 3 times 4 is going to be 12, and 3 times 1 is going to be 3. So 12/3 minus 16/3. And now the denominators are the same. 12 minus 16 is going to be negative 4/3 equals to b. All right, so with that, our final answer is f of x equals to the slope, which is 8/3x, and then our y-intercept is going to be negative 4/3. And that is our final answer for question 13b. Okay, so move on to, I think we have one more to do from question number 13. This is 13e now. All right, so maybe we'll do this a little bit faster now. So this is really the same thing as 3, 2. And this point right here is the same thing as negative 3, 2. All right, so now let's go ahead and find the slope. The slope is the difference in the y value. So here's a 2. So it's going to be 2 minus, and then this 2 downstairs, so 2 minus 2, all divided by the difference in the x value. So here's my first x value, which is a 3, minus my second x value, which is going to be negative 3. Okay, now on the numerator here, a 2 minus 2 is going to be a 0, and on the bottom here, I have 3 minus negative 3, which is the same thing as 3 plus 3, which is going to be 6. So I have 6 on the bottom there, and 0 divided by 6 is going to be 0. All right, so we have a very interesting case right here because the slope is equal to 0, right? So if I go back to my equation of the line, we can definitely fill this in because now we know our slope is 0. So that's going to be 0 times x. And then I have my y and my plus b, right? Now let's go ahead and just use this coordinate right here. So my y value is going to be 2. And it doesn't really matter what the x value here is. If I just kind of erase all this, my x value is now going to be 3. So 0 times 3 is still going to be 0. And if I do the calculations here, that goes to 0. This is 2 equals to b, right? So knowing that my y-intercept is 2 and my slope is 0, if I go ahead and fill in my equation of the line, mx plus b, this right here is going to be 0. So it's going to be 0 plus this 2 value, right? And 0 plus 2 is going to be 2. So f of x is going to be equal to 2. Just a reminder, whenever your slope is 0, basically you just have a horizontal line and the graph will look like this, where that has a height of 2. And that's it for 13E. Okay, let's move on to question number 14 now. I would think 14 is one of the more weird questions in this homework section here, and you do some of these kind of problems in Calculus 12. And basically what's happening with question number 14 is that you're given this weird expression, and you're given like this function here, and what you're doing is you're going to plug this function into this this expression right here. Okay, so a lot going on in this problem here, so let me just kind of rewrite this original expression here, and I'll show you exactly what's happening in this problem when we do our substitution steps here. So think of this expression right here as a formula, and you're plugging in functions into a formula. That's the idea of this problem here. Okay, so here's this f of x, right? So if I go back to the problem here, I know that f of x equals to 3x. So if I go ahead and plug that in, there's my minus sign. I can replace this f of x with just 3x. Okay, and now the goal is I need to figure out what f of x plus h is. So we did some of these kind of questions at the start of this homework exercise, and if I go back to the beginning of the problem here, what's happening here now is anytime you see an x here, the x is now being replaced with x plus h. So if I continue here, instead of writing this x is going to be replaced with x plus h. And this green expression is now equal to that. So this is going to be 3 onto x plus h. All right, and from here we just simplify this expression here, and we do this by distributing. So that's going to be 3x plus 3h, and then minus the 3x all over h. And then you'll notice that this 3x and this negative 3x, that just pretty much cancels off. And now you're just left with a 3h on the numerator, and you're left with an h on the denominator. And then this h and this h will cancel off, and your final answer is just positive 3. And that's your final answer for question 14a. For 14b, similar problem, and we're just given a different function to deal with. So let me kind of rewrite the original expression here, or the original problem here. And let's go ahead and start with this part right here. F of x, now what is f of x equal to? Well, here's f of x, and it's equal to that. So I can replace this with that. So minus sign. And then I'll put a bracket here, because that's going to be 5 minus 2x. All over the h, and the f of x plus h. All right, so as you can see, we're just putting this function into this formula here. Okay, after that, our goal is we've got to figure out what f of x plus h is, right? All right, so in order to do that, let me kind of rewrite f of x plus h down here. And basically, whenever you see an x, the x is now being replaced with x plus h. So this will be 5 minus 2 onto bracket x plus h. Okay, and basically this green function right here, that will replace this expression right there, because f of x plus h equals to 5 minus 2 onto x plus h. All right, so let me just erase this, and let me just substitute here. So a lot of substituting here. And then from here, you have a little bit of algebra going on. Let me start with this -2 here. This -2 will now distribute onto the x and the h. So now I have 5 minus 2x minus 2h. And then there's a minus sign here, and this minus sign will now distribute onto that, giving you a -5 and a plus 2x, all divided by h. All right, and then on the numerator, you will now collect like terms. So there's a 5 and a -5. So 5 minus 5 is going to be 0, so those just cancel off. And then I have a -2x and a positive 2x, and those will cancel off, right? So if you have 2x boxes and you lose 2 of them, then they cancel out. And now you have a -2x on the top, a -2h. So -2h on the top, and then on the bottom you have a single h. Those h's will cancel, and now you're left with just -2. And that's it for question 14C, I believe. 14C. Okay, and then finally for this homework video guide, we have a few word problems to figure out. So for question 15, I'm given that a function f of c is 9 over 5c plus 32, and this determines the Fahrenheit equivalent to degrees Celsius. And I need to find the Fahrenheit equivalent to the following temperatures here. So I have 30 degrees Celsius, 0 degrees Celsius, and I also have -40 degrees Celsius. So basically we're given the temperature in Celsius, and we need to convert that into Fahrenheit. So similar to like if you're given hours, you want to convert to minutes. So similar idea. So this is step number 1. I would just recommend rewriting the formula that converts Fahrenheit to Celsius. So 9 over 5c plus 32. Okay, and you have to understand here that you're given the c value here, right? So this 30 degrees will replace all the c's. So now we're evaluating f of 30 degrees. In fact, I'll just write it as just 30. I don't care about the units here. So anytime you see a c, the c is going to be replaced with 30. And then you're just doing some calculations now. Now, I recommend that you do division first. So 30 divided by 5. 30 divided by 5 is going to be 6, right? So 9 times 6, and then plus 32. And 9 times 6 is going to be 54, plus 32. And if I add that together here, you get 86 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so this answer will be 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And then let me just kind of erase all that, and then we'll do the next one. The next one is a little bit easier because now our c value is 0, right? So whenever you see the c value, it gets replaced with 0. And you have to be able to do this calculation quickly. 0 times anything is going to be 0. And now you're left with just 32. So 32 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so this will be 32 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so the units are degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And then finally for the last one for letter C here, we're given -40 degrees, right? So -40 degrees goes in for the C. So this will be 9 over 5 times by -40 plus 32, right? And I recommend that we do division again. So -40 divided by 5, that's going to be -8, right? And -8 times 9, that's going to be 72, or -72, plus the 32. And then -72 plus 32 is going to be -40, and the units are degrees Fahrenheit. So that's your answer for 15C. Later for this as well.